Welcome to the Domain Name Wire podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Alleman, and this is episode number 557. On today's show, rather than having a guest, I'm going to talk about my domain sales so far this year. I'll break down where I've sold them, what types of names I'm selling, including which top-level domains and how long they are, where I bought them and when, and much more. Stay tuned for that in this second part of the show. First up, a word from our sponsor. Our sponsor this week is Salve.com and its domain auctions. If you're looking to liquidate some of your domains, Salve auctions are a great way to do it. I've sold a few domains through Salve auctions. It was quick and easy. There was a great transfer process post-sale, and if your domains are at Salve, they'll actually transfer automatically. Best of all, sellers pay just a 4% commission. In fact, that's what it charges on its for-sale landers too, so check those out. To start selling your domains with Salve, go to salve.com/DNW/sell. That's SAV.com/DNW/sell. All right, let's talk about some news in the domain business from the past week. First up, there's several notable UDRPs to talk about. One of them was a reverse domain name hijacking case involving an Australian male strippers service. And if this sounds familiar, it's because it's the second reverse domain name hijacking case against this same company in the past couple months. Last month, a WIPO panel ruled that they tried to reverse hijack magicmin.com. This time, it was magicminlive.com. The company that filed both these cases was self-represented. They would have done well to consult a lawyer before filing these cases. In another case, the domain profit.com was saved in a UDRP, and although the result there is unsurprising, one notable thing about this UDRP is that it revealed that the domain sold for 1.1 million euros back in 2022. And then the other UDRP that I think is worth talking about is one that involved one of Brent Oxley's domains. He had the dictionary name prescriptive.com. And, it's not uncommon, I would say, for a company to go after a generic name like this. I mean, I just talked about profit.com. But this one was really amusing. The company that filed the case was called Prescriptive Health, but that's spelled Prescryptive. So prescriptive, think of it, the middle is spelled like prescription. And they were going after the correctly spelled prescriptive.com domain. But it's amazing what they argued. They said, quote, the disputed name prescriptive.com is confusingly similar to complainant's prescriptive mark because it differs by only a single character. The two are very similar, easily mistaken, pronounced identically. Because prescriptive, this is the misspelling, is coined, inherently distinctive mark with no dictionary meaning, the disputed domain name has no independent descriptive value. Its commercial value arises solely from its confusing similarity to the complainant's mark, end quote. Yeah, okay. It proceeded to argue that Oxley was cybersquatting by registering the correctly spelled term. It said he was typo squatting. Obviously, the panel called them out for these ridiculous arguments, saying that the complainant appeared to fail to see the irony in its argument that the respondent was typo squatting complainant's misspelled version of the dictionary word that Oxley owned. Panel went on to find reverse domain name hijack. Well, last week, GoDaddy released DomainNames.com. This is a new premium domain name marketplace. So they're listing domains for sale here that are 6 figures or more, and there are some great names on this platform. At launch, they had just over 100. They are trying to increase that, of course, but they have names like Harmony.com, Taiwan.com, Marketplace.com, Kale.com, a bunch of one-word .ais as well. So really good names. The process for getting on here is to apply, and the domains first have to be listed on Afternic before you can apply to have them on here. They're really looking for one-word domains here. I asked the company what the commission was. They said it's in line with what Afternic charges. So I guess we're talking somewhere between 15 and 25%. And you do have to list them exclusively on Afternic/domainnames.com if you list them there. And the exclusivity period is also negotiable. I'll say the domainnames.com site itself, we're talking about 6-figure premium names here. Someone on X pointed out that the logos aren't great. I tend to agree. If you're trying to market 6-figure names, they should put a little bit of time into the logos. I think another thing that against it is they're putting these logos on black backgrounds, which is pretty difficult to do. You have to make colors stand out on a black background. So hopefully they'll get to improving those. It'll also be interesting to see. They do say they will do some outbound marketing of these names. I think they'll do that en masse on social media and digital avenues, but they'll also do some one-to-one marketing, some outbound marketing. But it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I think this could be a good opportunity for domain investors, but I'd want to know some of the details and see exactly what kind of outbound marketing they're doing before listing any of my names there. On the expired domains front, SnapNames and Namejet have introduced a new model, kind of like a closeouts model. So, of course, GoDaddy has closeouts where they do the Dutch auction format where it starts at $50 and it goes down each day. What SnapNames is doing here is some of the inventory that doesn't sell at the original asking price, which is typically $69, they drop the price to $19 as a last chance. And you can bid on it there, but that might attract attention. So they also have a buy option for $39. So a little bit of game theory here, just kind of like with the closeouts at GoDaddy, where should I buy it at 30 or should I wait for it to drop to 11? Will someone else buy it? So $19 to bid or $39 to buy. You can look for a yellow, kind of an orange tag next to the names that have this bid or buy option on them. And then finally, there's been a lot of attention, or there was a lot of attention on this auction for blockchain.ai. It was being auctioned off at Namecheap. You might recall that the registry for .ai has an exclusive deal where they sell all expired domain inventory through Namecheap. Well, the auction ended at $405,000, but the prior registrant has filed a lawsuit trying to halt the transfer of the domain name. The man, Howard Gould, says that he registered the domain name or acquired it in 2017, and he had it set to auto-renew on only domains, but the auto-renew failed. I don't know why. Maybe his payment method was incorrect. And that resulted in the domain expiring on July 19th of 2025. But he didn't notice this right away. He says he became aware on September 21st, so he immediately paid only domains for the renewal and received a confirmation from them. But the domain wasn't renewed. He was wondering what was going on. On October 3rd, he emailed Only Domains asking why his invoice was still labeled as pending. And he also noticed that the domain was for sale on that Namecheap auction and attracting a lot of attention. It was at this point that Only Domains told him, oh, you also need to pay a restoration fee. So he paid that on October 6th, but the domain still went into pending delete status. On October 8th, he had an attorney reach out to Identity Digital, which manages the .ai registry, to try to halt that auction. They didn't do it, so now he is suing. It'll be really interesting to see how this one plays out. Of course, country code domain names have a very different regulatory background, if you will, compared to top-level domains like .com, .net, and .org, and even new top-level domains that have these strict contracts with ICANN. This is a lot of money, so it'll be kind of interesting to see what happens here. I think it'll also be up to Anguilla to some extent as well. They, of course, get most of the money from these expired domain auctions. All right, now let's shift gears and talk about my domain sales so far through the middle of October. Through the middle of October, I have 27 domain sales, and this seems a lot slower to me than last year. Although when I went back and looked, I actually only had 26 sales at this point, but then I had a huge end to the year. I had 6 sales in November and 9 in December. But if I'm going to end the year with 51 sales, like I did last year, it'll have to be a very strong finish again. So overall, I'm feeling a bit unsatisfied with my results so far this year. I can't tie the slowdown to anything in particular. I guess I would say I had a lot more domain sales last year that had .ai in them, a bunch of hand registrations that sold. But I think maybe there's a lot of uncertainty out there. There are a lot more unemployed and underemployed people, a lot of concerns about tariffs. How's this going to impact my business? That sort of thing. And I think the employment picture can have both a positive and negative effect on the aftermarket. On the one hand, businesses might be cutting back. On the other hand, people tend to start businesses when they're out of work. So there could be some upside, especially at the lower end. But let's dig in some more. First, talking about where I've sold domains. I've sold 20 domains at Afternic this year, 3 at Atom. 2 of these were premium listings. 1 was a basic one. And 4 direct. A couple of these direct sales were people who contacted me through the Who Is Contact form at GoDaddy, and 1 was outbound. Now, of course, I sold most of the domains at Afternic, but I've also listed and point most of them there as well. And nearly all of those have buy now prices. I don't use Afternic Boost, as Afternic hasn't yet convinced me of the value. I also point a couple hundred of my about 3,000 names to Atom, and all are listed on Cedo as well, but just with make offer, and I'm not pointing them there. And about a month ago, I listed almost all of them on Spaceship, mostly with buy now prices, but have only appointed a few to Spaceship landers. I rarely, if ever, do outbound. I say if ever because in August, I acquired a geo term that I knew a lot about and thought could be ideal for real estate agents in a particular area. After a slow August and beginning to September, I decided to take matters into my own hand. I looked up about 24 real estate agents that sell a lot of homes in this geographic area and cold emailed them. I received some responses and sold one of them this domain for $4,000. I had acquired it just a month earlier in a GoDaddy auction for about $500. One of the inbound sales I had this year was kind of interesting. It started off a bit adversarial. The guy reached out and said, "What are you doing with my domain name?" And I looked it up and saw that I had actually acquired it in the closeout in 2018. So he must have let it expire. I explained this to him and he came around. He said, "Oh, gee, I must have dropped the ball. Can I buy it from you?" We negotiated. He paid $2,000. It was a 4-word domain that I got for about $30 in that closeout in 2018. The Atom sales have been very welcome. I only have a handful of premium domains at Atom, maybe a couple dozen. So it's nice that 2 of those have sold there. Breaking down the length, one was a 4-letter .gg domain. 9 other domains were fewer than 10 characters, excluding the top-level domain. And my sweet spot is clearly the 10 to 12 characters, where I had 11 sales. I sold an additional 3 at 13 characters, a 14-character domain, a 16-character domain, and even a 19-character domain. All of those counts exclude the top-level domain name. 6 of the domains were one-word domains, although the 3 .coms that were one word, they're dictionary terms, but they have like a prefix, suffix, maybe an ed at the end, that sort of thing that make them less ideal. 20 are 2-word domains, which I imagine is everyone's sweet spot when it comes to .com domains. And 1 was the aforementioned 4-word domain name. I should have mentioned that even though it was 4 words, it was just 14 letters, so they were short words. Now, although I have 27 sales this year, some people might not count all of those as sales because 7 of them are lease-to-own sales. And they could certainly be canceled at any time. In fact, one of them has been canceled in just a month after it started. 4 of the 7 domains I've sold on lease-to-own transactions have been developed, which I take as a positive sign that they'll continue to pay. However, one of the cancellations, that one cancellation that canceled a month after it started, was developed too. So take that for what you will. For comparison, last year through the full 12 months, I had 5 lease-to-owns, and one of those has been canceled. I definitely added a lot more of my inventory to LTOs this year. At first, it was on domains up to about $5,000. I've increased that more recently, added another few hundred up to about $15,000 to $20,000. But I have limited the term. Some of my early LTOs were up to 36 months, and that's just too long for me. So I've set them mostly to 13 or 14 months long. Once it goes over 12 months, you get, at Afternic at least, you get a little bit more money. The buyer has to pay more money, and Afternic splits that with you. Now, that said, I have found that even if I set it to 13, 14 months, a lot of people choose 12 months because they're not dumb, right? There's a little slider, and they can see if they move it from 12 months to 13 months, all of a sudden they're paying an extra month and they're not really getting a discount. So I might try playing around with maybe an 18-month time frame on some as well, because people can start to see that price go down as they move out to about 18 months. Now, I don't mind receiving the money for lease-to-owns over time. I'm not cash-strapped. I don't live month to month. I've got plenty of cash. So in fact, I kind of like it. I like the regularity of getting this money over time. But then there's that downside, right? Which is I don't know if the buyer will make all of the payments. So the majority of my portfolio is .com domains, and 23 of my 27 sales thus far in 2025 are .com. 2 are .org domains. 1 was a .app domain. I only own about 5 or 6 of those that I bought very early on. In fact, I bought this one as a pre-order when .app was launched in 2018, but it was nice to get that sale. I'm a big believer in .app. I also like .dev. Both are backed by Google, and they've been well adopted by the developer community and the tech community. And then there's the one 4-letter, one-word .gg domain I sold. That was cold.gg. Now, it can take a while to sell domain names. So only one of the domains I've sold this year was registered this year. That was the one I outbounded and sold within a couple months. One was from 24. I'm disappointed that I haven't seen more sales from the domains I acquired last year because I did ramp up acquisitions quite a bit. 6 of the domains that I've sold this year were ones I acquired in 2023. 3 were from 2022, another 3 from 2021, and then the other 13 were 2020 or earlier. It takes time to sell domains, especially when you're passively selling and waiting for end users to come along. That's one reason I found the Domain Academy domain investment contest I'm participating in to be a bit frustrating. So if you haven't been following along, Domain Academy invited 5 of us, I think it was 5, to participate in this contest where they gave us $500 to spend on names. We could acquire those at GoDaddy, so we could hand register domains, we could buy closeouts. Technically, you could buy ones that aren't closeouts, but that money won't go far. It won't even go that far in closeouts. And then the goal is to see who can turn that into the most amount of money after 12 months. But as you can see here, I've acquired hundreds of domains last year and have sold 1 from last year in this year. So it can take a while to sell those domains. In fact, even if I acquired hundreds of domains, I might sell 1 within the next 12 months. And that's the time frame of this challenge. So the only way, other than dumb luck, to make this work is to sell to other domain investors. And I don't enjoy doing that. In fact, I cringe at selling some of these names cheap to other domain investors because I know they're worth a lot of money and I can sell them for thousands of dollars down the line rather than $100 or so right now. And I should mention these 27 real sales I've had this year. I'm not including these domain investor sales that I've made as part of this contest. So now that we've talked about when I acquired these domains, let's talk about where I've acquired them. I really go for a lot of the inexpensive domains. 8 of the domains I've sold this year were GoDaddy closeouts. 1 was a GoDaddy auction. That's the one I mentioned that I outbound and flipped for about 8x within a month or 2. 5 were SnapNames purchases. And all of those SnapNames purchases were in auctions, but they were fairly inexpensive. Let's see, one was a $71, $91, $125, $149. Only one of them was into the 4 figures. And then 5 were purchased at dropcatch.com. 3 of those were discounted back orders. 2 of them were uncontested full price back orders at $59. And then 8 were hand registrations. Now, of course, most of those hand registrations are from a long time ago. However, I did sell 1 hand registration. It was from 2023, so just a couple of years old. That was a domain I found using an AI domain search tool. Of the 27 names I've sold this year, 12 have been developed. And the median price of all my sales is $3,500, which is up a bit from last year. The median means that half have sold below that amount and half above. I think overall what this shows is domain investing can be inconsistent, especially if you have a smallish portfolio and you are a passive domain investor, meaning you wait for buyers to come to you. I have just under 3,000 names, and I don't rely solely on investing for my income. In fact, if I did, I would have to change my strategy. I would feel the pressure to do outbound, which I think is smart for a lot of people, and maybe at some point it'll be worth my time as well. So now we've gotten to the end here. I want to share some of the domain names that I have sold here, just a handful of them. I'll list them off here to give you an idea, but really I have a really diverse portfolio. I sold militaryperks.com, safetyplug.com, warrantysearch.com, statusai.com, winterbell.com, so a really generic name. And let me mention one other I sold here. Well, I'll mention the .app domain I sold. That was voicemail.app. All right. Hope you found this helpful. That's a wrap on this week's Domain Name Wire podcast. You can listen to all previous episodes at dnw.com/podcast or on your favorite podcast app. Speaking of apps, make sure to download the Domain Name Wire app where you get a push notification when new podcasts go live. If you're on an iPhone or iPad, go to dnw.com/Apple. If you're on an Android device, go to dnw.com/Android, or just go search in your app store. Thanks for listening.